The forest was vast and ancient, a sprawling wilderness of towering pines and tangled underbrush. Locals called it Blackwood, a name spoken in hushed tones and often accompanied by crossed fingers or whispered prayers. It wasn't just the name that unnerved people. It was the stories. Hunters disappearing without a trace, campers found wandering miles away, babbling incoherently. And then there were the survivors, the ones who had seen it. No one knew exactly what it was, only that it moved through the forest like a shadow, silent and swift. Survivors described it differently. A hulking figure with too many eyes, or a gaunt skeletal thing with skin stretched taut over sharp bones. Whatever it was, anyone who encountered it and lived was cursed to a fate worse than death. Ethan and Carla had heard the stories, of course. They'd grown up in a neighboring town and spent their teenage years laughing at the tales of Blackwood. Now, in their mid-30s, the forest had become more of a curiosity than a threat. Ethan suggested the camping trip as a way to reconnect. Married for over a decade, their relationship had grown distant. Carla had agreed reluctantly, hoping that the isolation might rekindle something between them. They arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, the air rich with the scent of pine and damp earth. The forest seemed benign, even inviting. Golden sunlight filtered through the canopy, and birds sang overhead. Carla set up the tent while Ethan prepared a fire pit. "This place isn't so bad," Carla said, hands on her hips as she surveyed their little campsite. "See?" Ethan replied, grinning. "Told you it'd be fun." They laughed and shared a bottle of wine as night fell. The stars emerged, brilliant and uncountable in the inky sky. For the first time in months, they felt connected again. Then the sounds began. It started as a faint rustling in the underbrush, something so subtle that Carla thought it was the wind. But then it grew louder, branches snapping, leaves crunching, as if something massive was moving through the forest. "Do you hear that?" Carla whispered, clutching Ethan's arm. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. "Probably just a deer," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The noise stopped suddenly, plunging the forest into an unnatural silence. The usual chorus of crickets and distant owls was gone, replaced by a heavy stillness that made Carla's skin crawl. "Let's go inside the tent," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan agreed, and they retreated into the thin shelter of nylon and fabric. Carla lay awake for hours, her ears straining for any sound. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. They woke at dawn to find their campsite in disarray. The fire pit was scattered, their supplies overturned. A deep gouge marred the side of their cooler, as though something with claws had tried to tear it open. "What the hell did this?" Ethan muttered, examining the damage. Carla pointed at the ground. Look. Footprints. They were enormous, twice the size of a human's, with long, clawed toes that dug deep into the soil. The sight sent a chill through Carla, and she wrapped her arms around herself. "We should leave," she said. Ethan hesitated. "Maybe it's just a bear." Carla glared at him. "Does that look like a bear print to you?" Ethan didn't answer. Against Carla's protests, Ethan insisted on staying one more night. He reasoned that whatever had come through was probably gone, and they were deep enough in the forest that leaving immediately would be difficult. As dusk fell, the unease returned. Carla couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking their every movement. Ethan tried to comfort her, but his attempts felt hollow. The noises began again shortly after nightfall, louder and closer than before. Carla clutched Ethan's arm, her breath shallow and quick. "We need to go," she said. Before Ethan could respond, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night. It was inhuman, a sound that froze the air in their lungs. Carla felt her stomach churn as the scream turned into a guttural growl, reverberating through the trees. "What was that?" Ethan whispered, his face pale. They grabbed their flashlight and emerged from the tent, their breaths visible in the cold night air. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing only trees and shadows. Then they saw it. It stood at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by the trees. Its form was grotesque, a twisted amalgamation of limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched tight over its skeletal frame. Ethan and Carla froze, too terrified to move. The creature tilted its head, as though studying them, before letting out another scream that rattled their very bones. "Run!" Ethan shouted, grabbing Carla's hand. They sprinted through the forest, branches whipping at their faces. The creature gave chase, its heavy footsteps echoing behind them. Carla could hear its ragged breathing, smell the putrid stench of decay that surrounded it. Somehow, they made it back to their car. Ethan fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, as the creature emerged from the tree line. He managed to start the engine just as it lunged for them, its claws raking the side of the vehicle. They sped away, the creature's screams fading into the distance. They didn't speak on the drive home, the horror of what they'd seen rendering them mute. Carla kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the creature loping after them. Once home, they locked every door and window, but the sense of safety was fleeting. Ethan couldn't sleep. Every noise made him jump. Carla sat in the living room staring blankly at the wall. The next day, Ethan began acting strangely. He was jumpy, irritable, and kept muttering to himself. Carla caught him staring out the window for hours at a time, his eyes wide and unblinking. By the end of the week, Ethan was gone. Not physically, his body was still there, but his mind had unraveled. He babbled about the creature, about how it was still watching them, waiting for the right moment. Carla didn't know how to help him. One night, Carla woke to find Ethan standing by the window, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight. "It's here," he whispered, his voice shaking. Before Carla could respond, Ethan screamed and clawed at his own face, his nails raking deep gouges into his skin. Carla called 911, but by the time help arrived, Ethan was gone. He'd run into the forest. The authorities searched for days but found no trace of him. Carla was left alone, haunted by the memories of what they had seen and the creature's terrifying scream. She knew the truth, though. Ethan hadn't just run away, he had gone back to it. And she feared she might be next. Carla had moved out of their house within days of Ethan's disappearance. She couldn't bear the memories, the shadowy figure at the window, the claw marks on the car, and Ethan's slow descent into madness. She rented a modest apartment in town, keeping to herself and avoiding the prying questions of curious neighbors. But no matter where she went, the forest called to her. The dreams started a week after she moved in. In them, she was back in Blackwood, running through the trees as the creature's glowing eyes followed her. She'd wake drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, and she could swear she heard its screams echoing in the night. The worst part was the feeling that she was never truly alone. Shadows lingered too long in the corners of her vision. Footsteps creaked in the hallway when no one else was there. And then there were the whispers, soft, guttural murmurs that filled the silence when she was alone. Carla tried to suppress the growing dread, but it became impossible when she found Ethan's notebook tucked into her belongings. She didn't remember packing it, and yet there it was, sitting on her kitchen counter one morning. The notebook was filled with frantic scribbles, pages and pages of unintelligible scrawls. But on the last page, Ethan had written one clear sentence. "It's still in the forest, waiting." Carla's hands trembled as she read the words. Against her better judgment, she decided to return to Blackwood. She had to know what had happened to Ethan and to herself. Carla arrived at Blackwood on a cloudy afternoon, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. She parked her car at the edge of the forest and stepped out, the scent of pine and damp earth instantly overwhelming her senses. The forest felt alive as though it were breathing. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches creaking like old bones. Carla clutched a flashlight and a small hunting knife, though she knew they were useless against whatever lurked within. She retraced the path she and Ethan had taken months earlier, her footsteps crunching on the carpet of leaves. The deeper she went, the quieter the forest became. It was the same oppressive silence she remembered, a void that swallowed all sound. Hours passed without incident, but as dusk began to settle, Carla felt a presence. She turned, her flashlight sweeping the darkness, but saw nothing. "Ethan?" she called, her voice trembling. The only response was the distant snap of a branch. Carla stumbled upon the creature's lair just as night fell. It was a hollow at the base of a massive tree, its roots twisting into the earth like skeletal fingers. The ground was littered with bones, animal and human, and the air reeked of decay. She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to turn back, but something compelled her forward. Her flashlight illuminated the hollow, revealing a makeshift nest of leaves and fur. And then she saw it. The creature stood at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on her. It was larger than she remembered, its hunched frame trembling with unnatural energy. Its claws were coated in dried blood, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Carla froze, unable to move as the creature began to stalk toward her. Her survival instincts kicked in at the last second, and she turned and ran. The creature gave chase, its heavy footsteps crashing through the forest. Carla's lungs burned as she pushed herself to keep going, the flashlight beam bobbing wildly in her hand. She tripped over a root and fell hard, the flashlight skidding out of her grasp. Before she could scramble to her feet, the creature was upon her. It loomed over her, its breath hot and rancid. Carla braced herself for the end, but the creature hesitated. Its glowing eyes seemed to study her, as though recognizing something in her face. Then, to her astonishment, it spoke. Its voice was deep and guttural, more growl than words. "Why, have you returned?" Carla's mind raced, her fear momentarily overtaken by shock. I'm looking for Ethan," she stammered. The creature tilted its head, a low rumble escaping its throat. "The one who saw me. He is mine now." "What do you mean?" Carla demanded, tears streaming down her face. "Where is he?" The creature's grin widened. "He belongs to the forest, as do you." Before Carla could respond, the creature raised a clawed hand and touched her forehead. Pain shot through her skull, and her vision blurred. Carla woke hours later, lying on the forest floor. The creature was gone, and the forest was eerily quiet. She stumbled to her feet, disoriented and weak. When she finally reached her car, dawn was breaking, casting the forest in an eerie golden light. She drove home in a daze, her mind racing with fragmented memories of what had happened. Over the following days, Carla began to experience strange symptoms. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and she caught glimpses of glowing eyes in her mirrors. The whispers grew louder, filling her apartment with their maddening chorus. Worst of all, she couldn't stop thinking about the forest. Carla's friends and family noticed her decline. She became reclusive, refusing to leave her apartment and ranting about the creature in the woods. They tried to help her, but she pushed them away, terrified that the curse might spread to them. One night, Carla disappeared. Her apartment was left untouched, with no signs of a struggle. The only clue was a single line scrawled on her bedroom wall. "It's calling me." Carla was never seen again, but her disappearance added to the growing lore of Blackwood. Hikers and campers began to report sightings of a shadowy figure with glowing eyes, and more people vanished in the forest each year. Some say Carla became part of the forest, a guardian curse to lure others to the creature. Others believe she escaped but lost her mind entirely, wandering the woods in a perpetual state of fear. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. The monster in Blackwood is still there, waiting for its next victim. And if you see it and survive, you'll never truly escape. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to hear more scary stories, please like and subscribe to my channel.